So hello everybody, and thank you to the organizers, Amy, Connie, and Charlie for the invitation, and also to include a piece of sustainability into a sports medicine conference, because it's a topic that it's very heard in our days, and we talk about a lot of sustainability. So I think it's a very important topic that no field is non-aware of. So I'm happy today to talk about Run for the Planet, and how we can integrate sustainability when we talk about sports nutrition. I think when we talk about sustainability and nutrition, a lot of the pictures that come to our mind maybe are similar to those ones. So we imagine the cows grazing in the mountains, we imagine fresh mushrooms picked from the forest, maybe some fresh sourdough bread, maybe some carrot just from our garden. But I really like that we maintain this picture through our talk, even if we are talking about sports and sports nutrition and performance, because I really like this sentence from a Catalan writer that says that the cooking of a country is their landscape putting in a casserole. And I think that it's really what we should keep in mind when we talk about sports nutrition and sustainability. I just want to say there is a picture of a person up there, that's Dr. Nana Meyer with me. I just put it her because she was my advisor and she was one of the pioneers in sustainability and sports nutrition, and we did a lot of research together. So I really want to acknowledge her when I show you the research we did together. So I want to start this to ask, what is sustainability? Because I would say sustainability nowadays, it's a very trendy word. We see it everywhere. So we have sustainable fashion, we have sustainable economy, we have sustainable energies, sustainable transportation. This is from a Spanish, you can even go to a party in a sustainable way, fiestas sostenibles. I really like it when I saw it, and it's just because you have this reusable glass, for example, when you go partying. And then we call it sustainable partying. So really, we use the word of sustainability for everything. But what that really means, and the basic definition and a very simple one of sustainability, it's really meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of generations to meet their needs. And we are not really accomplishing that right now. So when we talk about sustainability, also we have to focus that we do not only talk about environmental sustainability, we also have to talk about economical and social sustainability. Today I'm going to talk a lot about environmental sustainability because this is our studies we have focused on, but we should not forget the other pillars of sustainability. And also when we talk about health, and here we have a lot of health professionals today working with athletes, and we want performance for our athletes, but we want also health. And I really like this paper, it's a little bit old, 2014, from Kenjar, that she discusses the importance that when we promote health promotion strategies, we also think about sustainability with the 3 pillars of sustainability, and how we can integrate these with all the strategies we do. But then today we are not talking about sustainability as a broad concept, we are talking about sustainable diet, sustainable food. And what is sustainable diet? This is the FAO definition, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and these diets with low environmental impacts which contribute to food and nutrition security to healthy lives for present and future generations. But I really like this picture. Maybe it's a bit small, and I apologize for that. But this is, imagine a flower, really. You have sustainable diets in the middle, and how many things it's included when we discuss about sustainable diets. It might be things like having an adequate nutrition, so you have all the nutrients that you need. As a dietitian, that's the first thing I will think of. But then that the nutrients and the foods we are putting in our plate are preventing us from diseases, for example, diabetes, cancer, etc. It will be also that the diet it's produced in a sustainable way, that it has some, how many greenhouse gas emissions I'm emitting to produce that food, for example, or how much diversity I am putting on the food and in nature, or I'm preserving that diversity. Also, it has some fair trade aspects of it. Why are the people who are producing that food well paid, well treated, etc.? And then it has a cultural aspect of it. I went once in South Korea for 5 weeks and living with Asians, with Koreans, and one day it was my turn to cook, and I cooked, a Spanish potato omelette with some tomato bread, olive oil I brought from home, And then we sit in the table, they look at me and they said, we have to cook rice. And I was like, come on, it's plenty of carbohydrates here, you know? And we had to cook rice, we had to. And we had rice with the potato and the bread. So it was a really carbo-loading food, but this is the cultural aspect of food, what we expect in our tables. And when people move abroad, it's one of the things that reads ours very on our heart. So really sustainable diet is a complex mixture of interactions that we have to take into account when we talk about it. But why it's important when we talk about food, talk about environmental sustainability. When I was a kid, we talk a lot about, using public transportation or, for example, recycling. But in our days, now we are hearing more and more the environmental impact of producing food. So it really contributes to 26 to 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions, one of the activities that emits a lot of human activities. But it has other impacts on the environment: land use, water use, ecotoxicity, so the effect of pesticides and herbicides, for example, in our health or the ecosystem's health. And also diet has an impact on health and our well-being. So we have a potential here for change. And generally, not always, but in general, we will say that what is good for us, it's also good for the environment. There was in 2020, the Eat Lancet Commission launched what they call the need for a great food transformation, calling for a planetary diet, and talking about how many changes we have to do our diet, and that any part of it, so any sector of the population, it has to be taken into account. So the environmental impact of food, maybe a lot of you are aware, there are some foods that has a low environmental impact. So for example, in this case, it's highlighted here some nuts, some legumes, some whole grains, and some other foods that have a higher environmental impact, but also some effects on our health, so for example, red meats. But is it easy to calculate the environmental impact of diets, or anything? Because this is quite complex. So I am a dietitian, I'm not an environmental scientist, but during my PhD and my postdoc, I work with environmental scientists with this methodology. So this is called life cycle assessment. And life cycle assessment is really a methodology that it's a standardized methodology to measure the environmental impact of foods from cradle to grave. So imagine how much I need to produce the seed of the wheat, then to produce that wheat, to process that wheat, to become a pasta for tomorrow's marathon, to get to the supermarket, to cook it at home, and the waste I'm generating if I don't eat the whole plate of pasta. So really, this life cycle assessment, it's kind of a complex methodology, and we have 4 main aspects. I'm just going to go into explaining a little bit, so then it's done. I know it's not very sports nutrition, but it's going to help for later on. So what we do is we measure the system boundaries. So what do we want to measure? I want to measure the environmental impact of the pasta from the seed to the plate, or only the farm gate, for example, the impacts on the farm. What is the functional unit I'm using? Because it will change. I am measuring 1 kilogram of pasta, 1 plate of pasta, 100 grams of pasta. This will change the total environmental impact of that. What are the impact categories? We hear a lot about carbon footprint, but really we have many other categories. As I said, water use, land use, ecotoxicity, eutrophication. So we have to take them all into account if we want a very good comprehensive assessment of the environmental impact of diets. And then we take all the information, how many energy I'm using, how many pesticides, what are the inputs and outputs of producing that food. And at the end, I'm evaluating what I'm measuring, so I can interpret the results. So just put it in a graphical and maybe easier way to see. You can see here, it will be really, I have my crop production, my wheat, I take out all the inputs that I need to produce that and what is the output that I'm having. I try to measure that up to the consumer. So that will be my system boundaries. And then I can have the environmental impact. There are some assumptions I have to do in these models sometimes, but now in our days we have quite a good way of data to measure the environmental impact of foods. But the question that maybe some of you are asking, okay, why athletes should care about that? So I think in general, when we talk about sports, we talk a lot about reducing the environmental impact that we do. And racing all around the world, traveling sometimes, it's something that comes up a lot. But we eat also at least 3, 4, 5 times a day. We are those privileged that have a plate in the table as many times as we want something, you know? So we have to think about what's the environmental impact of what we eat too. Athletes, moreover, have higher energy requirements. They need more food, they are training a lot, they spend a lot of calories than the general population, and also a higher protein requirements. Sports nutrition recommendations in proteins have focused a lot in dairy and meat, so animal-based proteins, which have a higher environmental impact. And we had very little research on the effects of plant-based diets on the recovery and anabolism effects on muscle. There are some studies now coming, all the labs that are working on proteins, now they are doing a lot of research in plant-based proteins. So I'm happy to see that in the last 5 years, this research is really growing. Also, athletes are a role model for society and huge influencers. Football Club Barcelona did a campaign some years ago with these big players just playing around with cabbages and promoting veggies, and it did a huge impact in the child's population. So really, I would not say, but we can use that and really to do some good on the population. So this power of social sustainability. And I think all strategies of nutrition should consider sustainability principles. Now we have hospitals, we have other sections of nutrition that are really focusing on sustainability, and sport should not be left. Also, when we talk about why athletes should care, I really like this paper for Tara Garnett, that she talks about different populations in the world. And I think the athletes, at least in our countries, they fell in the category of diets for the healthy and the wealthy. So we are those that we have a high dietary intake, we have a balanced energy, food energy intake, we consume moderate to high animal products, and generally in westernized countries we consume quite a lot. We consume quite a lot of fish, because it's expensive, we can afford it. A lot of high fruits and veggies, whole grains, avoided processed food if we are in a healthy diet, or in athletes are very mindful of their diet. We have high food waste generally, especially think about that we waste 1/3 of the food that is produced in the world, and especially in developed countries, we are doing that at the consumer stage mainly. So really we are very responsible of how many food we waste. And then, of course, we can cook, and we have a heavy use of cooking. We open the oven. We are not thinking, okay, I should open maybe the oven only once a week because it's really energy intense. I don't know if somebody thinks about that. And I'm trying to batch cook the day that I open my oven. So really think about this when thinking about our athletes, or ourselves, or us as a recreational athletes. So I think we really should care, because we are the ones that we can be able to make a change in our diets. So in that mind, we developed the validation of the athlete's plate. And that was the first study that we did with athletes. And the athlete's plates, maybe some of you are familiar with. If not, it's available to download here. It was a tool. It's a very easy educational tool developed by the Nana Meyer, the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and the United States Olympic Committee. So the athlete's plate, it's a very easy educational tool that it's the easy, the moderate, and the hard training plate. So it's not personalized nutrition, but a very nice tool, especially when you work with young athletes, for example. So in the easy plate, you have less carbohydrate, only a quarter, and then it increases to a half of the plate on the hard training plate. So this plate was developed, but never tested. Is it valid? If we put plates together, does it correspond with the recommendations? And that's what we did. So we had sports dietitians from the United States Olympic Committee and others coming to the United States Olympic training facilities in Colorado Springs at the dining hall, so with the buffet and everything available of that day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and making diets for hypothetical athletes. Okay, so now you have to make a breakfast for a 75 male in a hard training day. And they will put together different plates. We end up with a lot of plates, and we weighted the amount of food that was there because we had all the recipes. We were able to break down all the ingredients and measure and analyze the nutrition composition of those plates to check if they really match with the recommendations for easy, moderate, and hard training dates. What we found is that they match for carbohydrates, for fiber, for fats, and for energy, but for proteins, they were higher than the recommended. And think about athletes, we took the reference of 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight as a kind of an average for all training loads categories of the plates, but they were higher, especially for moderate and hard training plates. And when we analyzed the type of proteins that were on those plates, we found that mainly we had animal-based proteins. So really 26 plant-based proteins compared to 73 animal-based proteins. Then our question popped up in our head. Sorry. No. What's the environmental impact of the athlete's plate? Because we know that animal-based proteins have a higher environmental impact. So let's analyze that. So then we contacted Agroscope. This is a research center in Switzerland specialized in life cycle assessment for foods and products, and they help us figure out how to do that. We did a life cycle assessment on the foods that we had. We had all the information to get all the products, and we kind of analyzed the results. So here you have on the top, easy, moderate, and hard training plates. And on the side, I don't know if it's too small, sorry about that, it's at the top, global warming potential, exergy, the use of energies you are using for producing those foods, ecotoxicity, the effect of pesticides and herbicides, if you want, on human health and the ecosystems, and eutrophication, it's related to the use of fertilizers on the food and how it affects the ecosystem. So you can see that in all these cheeses that you have the blue and red part, the biggest generally, this is dairy and meat. So really, animal protein was driving the total environmental impact of the plates. Except for ecotoxicity, where the green one is bigger, and that's because it's for the veggies. We have a lot of pesticides and herbicides used, and in this study, we didn't contemplate the difference between organic and conventional agriculture. So with that, we said, okay, what's happening here? Let's try to think about it. So we developed what we thought was the sustainable plate. We identified some hot spots that made our plates quite high. One was that when we analyzed the protein intake, why it was so high? We found that maybe some plate has, I don't know, a salad of quinoa and corn and some other plant-based rich veggies, some tofu on the side, then a piece of meat or fish, then a yogurt, and maybe a milkshake. Very US style, I know, but at the end, the total protein content was quite high. So we developed some educational materials to reduce the amounts, to reduce on the dining hall the portions of the meat, for example, a little bit, and to change and think also the inclusion of some seasonal and local veggies on the kitchen. We developed also this other plate that was about athletes' education, how they can think about when putting things on the plate, doing this protein flip, that the protein, animal protein, it's not the centerpiece of the plate, it's maybe a topping on the plate, things like that. And also, even if we didn't analyze social and economical sustainability, we wanted to highlight some aspects and give some tips on how these are important when thinking what you put in your plate. And from that study, we developed the vegetarian and vegan athlete plate, which is not yet published, but we are working on that right now. And Heidi Lynch, it's leading that manuscript, but it's also available online in the UCCS website. So these results, I hope we will have at some time. We developed the vegetarian and vegan athlete, and we wanted to also to validate, also thinking about nutrients that are a bit more sensitive for these populations of iron, vitamin B12, zinc, etc. So how we can go from theory to practice? Because now I maybe talk a little bit of this life cycle assessment and the theory, what we have done, but we gave also some practical examples how athletes can be mindful. We published this paper to give kind of easy ideas on how athletes can apply these things. So these are 4 areas I wanted to highlight today. One is to reduce animal sources of food, especially red meat, and especially in our developing countries. How to do that? Sometimes it's not about let's avoid it altogether, because, for example, in some athletes, maybe some little pieces of meat can help with some iron deficiency. There is also one thing, I don't know how many of you are used to eat offal, for example, or even to cook it, because we have lost, now we use only some parts of the animal, and some other parts are going to waste. So it's also important to think how we use all the parts of the animal. Some of these parts of offal, very rich in vitamin B12 and iron, for example. So think about that when we think about athletes that want to eat meat, but which parts we should be eating. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit about a flexitarian approach and a protein flip approach later in my new slide, talking about that. Another part that we detected in our study that was reduced processed, frozen, and canned foods. In big facilities, such a training facility where a lot of athletes, you need to have a lot of storage food for a very long time in the fridge, a lot of canning foods used for cooking. These things increase a little bit the environmental impact on our plates at least. So think about this when planning meals on a dining facility. Reducing food waste, really. This one, it's so many times not thought of, how we can implement to reduce food waste at our homes and in training facilities or dining halls, because it really has a big impact. We are privileged to have food. When we throw it away, next day we have it in the fridge, but think about that. And avoid unnecessary packaging. When I'm traveling with athletes, maybe somewhere I need a plastic bottle of water to ensure we don't have any GI problems or parasites or other things. But in some countries, in some places, when we are home, these things can be possible to do. This is the concept of the protein flip, and I don't know if you know about that, but this is a concept of the menus of change. It's a concept developed by the American Culinary Institute and the University of Harvard. And the idea is really that you take your piece of meat off the plate, in the central of the plate, like your burger or your steak, and it's the topping. So we have this, but the amounts really make a difference on the total environmental impact on the plate. We implemented this, and it's too small to see, but it's published. We developed some burgers, for example, including seasonal food, reducing the total animal protein, and maintaining the protein and the amino acid composition. And here I want to give some practical examples from 3 dietitians all around the world. So this is not mine, but this is Catalina Fernandez. Catalina, she was the dietitian of the Costa Rica Olympic Committee, and she did a fantastic job when she arrived developing a nutritional sports nutrition program where she included traditional foods from Costa Rica and recipes adapted for athletes to highlight the importance of traditional food in their athletes. They had a cooking kitchen, very nice one. They had weekly visits to the farmer's market. So she kind of bringed back this traditional food in the daily lives of the athletes, highlighting their culture and foods and how they can use it for training. Genevieve, she's a dietitian in Canada working with winter athletes, and she has developed these very nice little veggie gardens at the entrance of the training center where athletes are responsible for their own garden. They grow their own veggies. They get excited about food. That's what we really want sometimes. And then we have Nana Meyer. Nana was the dietitian for United States Olympic Committee for a long time, and she was working especially with US speed skating, with Olympic athletes. They were based in Salt Lake City. So what she did, sometimes as a team members, we need to find sponsors, right? And a lot of times we need to supplement sponsors in sports nutrition. She looked into a farmer. So she partnered with a farm, and the idea was to get athletes to fill their fridge with very fresh products. So athletes will get every week fresh products in their door from that farm. Seasonal products, she always said, sometimes she had a WhatsApp from an athlete saying, okay, I don't know what veggie is that, how do I cook this? And every week they will do a cooking session all together and share a meal. So this is a way of getting excited to know food, to expand food literacy for our athletes. And then there is the team. As a team, we develop our sport nutrition strategy a lot of times, but there is the opportunity at some times to include sustainability. So when we discuss about healthy, balanced diet, very basic stuff, we can talk about local, seasonal, cooking, growing food. Maybe doing, I don't know, the team building experience of the team, it's in a farm. Let's talk about local foods. There are sport-specific nutrition strategies. We can talk here about protein flip and increasing plant-based products. We can talk about packaging, food storage, traditional foods when we talk about traveling. So we enjoy the traditional cuisine. And also sometimes when we talk about supplements, I will say, let's focus on food first approach first. And then the event. So when we organize events, a lot of times, especially on the Olympics, they have developed what they call the food vision. And it started a little bit with London, here, that they had this London food vision to organizing the Olympics, when they sourced some products locally. In Paris, they brought that to the next level and really tried to increase what was plant-based protein and options in the catering, trying to source much more locally and for friends. So there are things that we can do when organizing events. But here in the London Marathon, before I came, I also talked to Kate Chapman. She's the head of sustainability. I don't know how many of you were on the booth of sustainability at the Excel Center. From those who are running. Somebody was at the sustainability booth? No. Okay, so there was a sustainability booth talking about what they are doing in the London Marathon about sustainability, and they are doing quite a lot of things. And this year there is the option also to green run, that for example you don't get the final medal, you don't get a t-shirt, trying to reduce the waste that they use. So they do different strategies organizing this event. They also gave you maybe, or you have seen these bars that are beeswax, so they don't have any packaging, for example. So there are some strategies that are coming up. I will say more innovation and more to come in the next years. So what's the take-home message for everything that I have said today? So I think we need a change how we eat, all of us, whatever we are athletes, whatever we are not. But we need the knowledge, of course, of what we are doing. We need the engagement of doing. It's not enough to know what we need to do. It's really, we have to do it, and we need to really take this action to do it. And I think it's also important in sports nutrition. When we do all that, at the end, we can win the medal that we won, whatever is in the marathon or whatever is in our aim objectives. But at the end, what we have to keep in mind is that we want to win, win, win for the next generation. So thinking about whatever we are doing, it's have to think and take into account these sustainability aspects. So I want to thank you. Just remind, this is from my little village. I live here. I was raised and born here. Now I came back to my roots. And I think Nana always had a sentence that said, nutrition education has to go in a very different direction, back to the roots. Today we heard a lot about strategies, lab strategies, amazing strategies, how to improve performance, but at the end we have to cook this food. We have to cook it with local and seasonal food. We have to bring that to our plates. So remind this connection with nature every time you eat. So thank you very much.
We'll take a few questions for Alba before we move on to the round table.
Thank you. My name's Louise. I think it's really important work that you've done, so firstly, thank you so much. I was wondering if you, and it was nice hearing how Nana, Catalina and Genevieve have...
I don't hear you correctly. Can you put the mic?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I was saying thank you very much. It's important work that you're doing. So firstly, thank you. And it was nice to hear how Catalina, Genevieve and Nana are working with communities. I was wondering if you have any plans in how to distribute and advertise your work, because I often feel that the people that engage with this kind of stuff are the people that are already interested and educated in it. And I think, so I did a lot of competing last year in cycling and did that as a vegan and faced a lot of questions, I think, from my peers. And yeah, just I was wondering if you had any plans to, it just feels like the culture still has a lot of a long way to go.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think I have seen a change in the last years, and I think there is educated people on the matter, there is people that are not. I have not heard anything of that when I studied nutrition, for example, and I'm not so old. So it's really a new topic we are discussing here. I think there are things that we can do without saying. I was a dietitian for teams, and I will plan the menus, and I will take into account these aspects, for example. So my athletes, I will not discuss with them why I decreased the animal protein intake on my menus, if they didn't ask about it. Then I will talk about sustainability, maybe in other things, but on the menu planning, I can do a lot of things without even telling, and you are doing an action. So I think you can do a lot of things when people are not really interested, but really already engage them. And the other thing I think is that institutions, teams, organizations are getting really interested in these things, and people are starting to hear it. So I think it's coming. And sometimes you have to nudge a little bit, not say, you have to do that, but nudge somehow, and change will happen. So I'm an optimistic. I think we should be a bit faster than what we are in all these things, but I'm an optimistic, thinking it will happen. Yeah. I forgot to say something before, and if you allow me, just 1 second. For those who are really interested, we have a community of people working in sustainability and nutrition, especially, or nutritional sciences. And now we have a WhatsApp group. It has been led by Peter Res. He's a dietitian in the Netherlands. So if anyone wants to join, let me know. I can attach you to the WhatsApp group. There is no commitment attached. But I thought I should say before leaving. Yeah. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. The question I have that I keep coming up against in my own practice with nutrition is the cost. And is there any data that perhaps you or your team have come up that can do like a cost comparison of actually eating sustainably isn't going to break the bank?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, because it comes up a lot of times that eating healthy, for example, or eating sustainable, it's much more expensive. Yes and no. So it's true that, for example, when you go to organic food, it's much more expensive than conventional food in general. Or when you go to the local market, sometimes it's more expensive than you go to a big supermarket. I will say it's priority. So what are the priorities that we have? And other people might buy, I don't know, clothes that are very expensive, but not buy on food. So this is prioritized things. And the other thing is, I don't agree with the topic that we say it's much more expensive, because how much is 1 kilogram of beans? It's super cheap. How much is 1 kilogram of meat? So I will say just it requires more time, more cooking, more thinking, even the knowledge. Or how much is the offal? It's super cheap. So I'm sorry, it's just that we are so used to getting our piece of nice fish that we only take, I don't know, salmon and cod, and it's expensive, but there are so many other fishes that cost €1. So for the whole family, really. So I think it just, do we know how to cook again in another way? But it requires a bit of education. That's why nutrition education in the kitchen, for us, it's so important in our practices. And as a dietitian, we need also to learn about all this. Yeah.
Hi, Alba. Thank you so much for the informative presentation. It's just one question. What are the potential disadvantage of following sustainable diet as an athlete? So what do you consider as like a disadvantages if I'm going for a marathon or something?
Can you speak a bit slower? Sorry. I think
I mean, what are the potential disadvantages following sustainable diet? Thank you.
Super, yes. So not sustainable diet in general, I think one of the potential dangers that we see, especially when we follow a more plant-based diet, it's a deficiency of some nutrients, or the problems of GI at some moments when we need to increase, because plant-based proteins generally have more fiber or are a little bit harder to digest. So here we need to be very creative. So we know, for example, that fermentation can increase the bioavailability of the amino acids. Extrusion of some protein, like pea protein or soy protein, can also increase. We know the availability, for example, of calcium in tofu is high. So we really need to think about much more deep about those things. So I think when an athlete wants to do this switch by their own, they have to be extremely careful and go to a professional if they don't have the knowledge to do it, because it can lead to some deficiencies that has an impact on the training. It has to, I think, also, especially in When you're at home and you're training and you have a bit of time, normally it's fine. But when you are very busy or recovery or in leading to competition moments, then it gets a bit more tricky. So really being very aware of that. Make sure you get the following that you need to ensure this is okay. And dietitians have to become very creative planning those meals.
We're going to move to our round table now, but if we could just give a round of applause to our last two speakers.